Welcome back, Grimdark Collective. I hope you're all doing well. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at one of the most grim, dark and nasty factions in all of 40k, the ubiquitous Death Guard. Over the course of this tutorial, I'll show you my take on how to paint the Lord of Poxes in a weathered, horrific and grimdark style. I'll cover such topics as pre-weathering, the use of texturing, chipping medium for realistic battle damage, acrylic glazing, oil and enamel blending, how to render flayed skin, rust, verdigris, leather and armour that retains some vibrancy while still fitting the style we all love. So, let's see what we can cook up for this fantastic miniature. I'm your host, Black Chalice Studio. Let us begin. In a moment, I'll show you a full list of products used in this tutorial for reference purposes. The only addition I decided to make to this really nice sculpt was to make a small scenic base for him. To achieve this, I built up a rocky outcrop using cork sheet, covered this in texture paste, added a couple of plastic spikes, some photo etched barbed wire and a few skulls before covering the flat surfaces with my favourite basing ballast. Our first step towards achieving a battle-damaged, weathered and ancient armour is going to be some physical abrasion. Using a fresh scalpel blade, I'll make a series of cuts and gouges designed to convey larger impact damages. The key here is not to go too overboard, unless of course you want super heavy weathering. To follow this up and create smaller scratches, holes and scrapes, I'm using a modified airbrush cleaning needle. I simply bent the tip round into a hook shape and sharpened the end. These smaller marks are a nice contrast to the larger ones applied in the previous step. I pay special attention to his gargantuan greatsword here, making sure the edges are heavily dented and gouged to imply centuries of use, cutting down those brave enough to oppose the Lord. To remove any plastic shavings left over, I'll just use an old stiff bristle brush and scrub over the areas, cleaning them up ready for the next step. Now we're going to take a look at one use for what I consider a top tier product when working with plastic models, Tamiya Extra Thin Quick Setting Cement. Alongside its many other uses, we can take a small amount of the cement on the provided brush and modulate the edges of the gouges and scratches we've applied. With just a few quick swipes, we can rapidly melt these small burrs and lips, meaning we can leave some fairly raised and proud to imply fresh damages, and also reduce some back, making the gouges look old and worn down. Moving on to the last couple of pre-weathering steps, here we're going to add some texture to the miniature using liquid green stuff. Another great product, we can use this neat or diluted with water to achieve some really interesting and varied finishes, from flesh effects all the way through to heavily corroded metals. I wanted to portray the cloak on the Lord as freshly flayed skin, a fitting material for such a horrifying character. Coming in with a fairly heavy dilution, I'll stipple the green stuff on gradually, covering the entire cape with an initial layer, then a second in a few select places. With the dilution level we're using here, the effect will be subtle, but definitely noticeable when painted. Liquid green stuff dries fairly quickly, and here you can see the subtle, pockmarked texture that we've created, akin to the pores found on human flesh. Our second application will be less diluted, and our aim is to create a pitted, old and battered surface to the armour. I'll apply some to the lower portions of each armour plate, as shown here, then come back in with a brush lightly dampened with water to feather out the upper edge, creating a smooth transition. Our final application is reserved for the sword, and will be our heaviest texture. For this stage, I'll come in with an undiluted pass, and lay it on fairly thickly, before stippling gently at the surface, giving the look of heavily corroded and ancient steel. You can go wild with these steps if you like, creating some super crusty Death Guard. Our last pre-weathering step here is the application of Typhus Corrosion thin 1 to 1 with water. This is reserved for the metallic areas of the miniature. Once I've applied a small amount to a certain area, I'll come back with a brush, lightly dampen with water, and feather out the transitions. And with all of the pre-weathering steps complete, this is how we're looking so far. Moving on to the priming stage, I'd normally use Stein or Res Black, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to buy in the UK. So, after some extensive testing, I've begun using MIG one-shot black primer. It's absolutely brilliant and easily on par with Stein or Res. It dries fast, levels easily, and is very hard wearing once dry. A few thin coats applied via an airbrush, and we're good to go with the painting stages. For the underlying chipping colour on the armour, we're going to use Vallejo Hull Red. This dark reddish brown is a great contrast against the green we're going to build up shortly. Again, we're just going to build this up gradually over a few thin coats until all of the armour is covered. After giving everything a couple of hours to dry, we can come in with our chipping medium of choice. In this case, AK Interactive Worn Effects. This is applied just like an acrylic, built up gradually over 2 to 3 coats until the armour panels take on a satin sheen. The key to getting the chipping medium working correctly is to not introduce any heat during the process. Doing so will accelerate the rate at which it cures, making the chipping stage almost impossible to perform past a certain point. So between each coat, I'll blow the surfaces dry with cool air through the airbrush. The initial base colour for our armour is going to be Ammo Atom Grey Green, which is very close to Citadel Death Guard Green in terms of its hue. A few thin passes in a very loose zenithal manner, and our foundation is on. We're aiming for 90% coverage here, just leaving the undersides dark. The mid-tone and most predominant colour will be GW Elysian Green. This will go down fairly vibrantly, but we'll knock it back a touch later on. Applied again in a few thin passes, I'll focus this as a more strict zenithal, coming in from above and hitting the upper portions of his armour plates. And for the final highlights, I'll use Ammo Atom Sky Green. This is an almost identical match for GW Nurgling Green. This is reserved for spot highlights and picking out the uppermost facing areas of the armour. You'll notice here that this will also desaturate the Elysian Green to a degree, which works in our favour. After giving these layers 5 minutes to dry, we can begin the chipping process. I always look forward to this and have a lot of fun doing it. First up, we want to dampen one armour panel at a time with clean water. This will reactivate the chipping medium. You'll then want to come straight in with your chipping tool. I'm using a sharpened toothpick. Start to gently poke and scratch at the surface, slowly revealing the dark hull red colour underneath. The key to achieving realistic chipping is to focus on areas that would naturally be subjected to scrapes and general wear and tear. Areas closer to the ground and along the edges of the plates, for example. Avoid any repeating patterns, as these will draw the eye and look out of place. Once you've worked your way across all of the armour, give the miniature a couple of hours to cure. As you can see here, I've applied the other base coats to the miniature by brush. They are 1-to-1 Deepkin Flesh and Carrack Stone for the cape, Lead Belcher for the metals, Ammo Red for the sword hilt, 1-to-1 Beastie and Leather Brown for the leather, Abaddon Black for the straps and pipes, and equal parts Necro Gold, Metal Colour Gold, Magnesium and Bronze for the bronze areas. The only other step before enamels is to add some sparse, subtle highlights to the cape. Using Deepkin Flesh diluted to a glaze consistency, I'll come in with a very lightly loaded brush and dab, stipple and tap at the raised folds and flat areas, building up these subtle highlights over 2 to 3 faint passes. Here's where the fun begins. We can start to introduce some much needed shading, weathering and grime. For the unifying wash on everything apart from the cape, I'll mix up a slightly diluted combination of Goon's Grime and MIG Black Enamel Wash. MIG Black is just that, a dead matte, plain black enamel, and something I use a lot when I need to darken down other enamels without introducing any unwanted sheen. I'll add just enough to make a dark, blackish, muddy brown colour. When it comes to applying the unifying wash, I treat it more like a heavy glaze than a wash. Light enough to avoid pooling in the crevices, but strong enough to evenly coat everything in a single pass. This will help tone down the vibrant green of the armour as it gradually stains the surface. As with all of my enamel applications, I'll blow dry them for around 30 seconds on medium heat to flash off any spirits left behind. To add some more contrast and darken the shadows down, I add a touch more MIG black to the mix and use this as a focused panel lining wash. This will blend seamlessly with the still fresh unifying wash underneath. I wanted a really pronounced staining effect here, so I gave the miniature around an hour to cure before coming back in for the initial reductive pass. Using a Q-tip lightly dampened with spirits, I begin gently and softly dabbing at the raised details and edges, along with some of the flat portions of the armour, avoiding any recesses. The spirits will reactivate the wash, allowing it to be absorbed into the Q-tip. After the initial rough pass, I came back in with the second, just focusing on a few prominent areas, giving them a cleaner finish. And for any hard to reach areas, just swap out to a brush and spirits instead. Okay, so let's move over to the cape. The first step in achieving that horrific, bloody, flayed skin effect is going to be giving it a sickly, brown-green hue. As the initial unifying wash, I'll add some Abtalung Industrial Earth to Goon's Grime and thin this down roughly 1:1 with spirits. You could just use Industrial Earth here, but I really like the fine particulated finish you get from Goon's Grime. You can see the level of dilution quite clearly here. It's almost like a glaze, and that's the way we're going to apply it. A nice, even, thin coat across all of the cape. After the application, I gave it around 20 minutes to cure partially. Coming in for the feathering pass, once again, I use a Q-tip lightly dampened with spirits. Whilst I focus thoroughly on reducing the wash from the raised folds and open flat areas, I spent most of my time creating nice smooth transitions between where the wash is darkest in the deep folds and the surrounding areas. Just keep slowly working away at these transitions until you achieve subtle and smooth gradients. For the first effect on the Lord, we're going to lay down our foundational layers of rust. I'll decant some Ex Machina, Sector Rust, Goon's Grime and MIG Black onto my palette. From here, I can mix and blend any number of different hues and tones. I do this all the time when working with enamels and oils. Having the freedom to mix and blend on the fly really allows me to be creative and come up with some unique colours. Starting off with Ex Machina, I'll dilute this slightly and apply it as a controlled wash to the deeper crevices and around prominent details. This will be our lightest tone and cover the largest area. From here, we'll work our way down, gradually getting darker. After 10 minutes, I'll come in for a quick reductive pass, just to reveal a few raised edges and details, along with removing any of the wash from areas I don't want it present. As I do with all of my enamel and oil effects applications, I'll pay special attention to making sure that I break up any hard edges where I applied the wash, focusing on creating smooth transitions and working towards an interesting, mottled finish at all times. I'll then repeat the same process, just covering slightly less area, using Sector Rust with a touch of Goon's Grime added, to create a dark, reddish brown, older looking rust. Again, the goal here is to create a mottled look to the rust and make sure to knock back any visible hard edges from the wash. I'll just let the video play here for a moment so you can see the process. And for the last step here, I'll add a touch of MIG Black into the previous mix and use this as a spot wash to really push the contrast in the deeper areas. Be quite selective and sparing with this step, as it's fairly easy to cover up the lighter hues that we laid down earlier. Moving on to our second effect today, we're going to add some verdigris to the bronze areas. I'll lay out some Abtalung oxide blue, smoke and turquoise on my palette and come in for an initial detail wash using a thin mix of oxide blue and smoke to set out our darkest tone. Over the top of this, I'll come in with the previous mix with a touch of turquoise lights added to bring about a lighter and more vibrant hue. This will blend effortlessly with the first layer we applied, creating a nice variety of tones. After around 20 minutes drying time, I'll come back in for a quick and easy reductive pass, cleaning the verdigris effect away from the raised edges and prominent details. With our rust and verdigris in place, it's now time to punch up the contrast on the metals and add some more weathering. For the steel, I came in with lead belcher, diluted fairly heavily. Using a lightly loaded, fine tip brush, I went about adding small lines and dots to the extreme edges to simulate scratching and damages. And for the larger, more open areas, I stippled on a very light application just to bring back some of the shine lost during the rust steps. And for our bronze areas, I used the same method with the initial bronze base colour. Because we're using fairly heavily diluted paint, these highlights will be very subtle, just adding some visual interest and contrast against the dark crevices. Now we're getting to the stages where we can really push that heavily weathered, nasty, grimdark look. Firstly, we're going to be taking our rust up a few notches to add some heavy corrosion, saturation and texture. Coming in with some neat dirty down rust, I'll dab and stipple this on to any areas I want to convey serious rust accumulation. This will rapidly dry to a dark orange reddish hue, and by layering up dirty down rust thickly, we can achieve a darker finish where we want it. This second pass is applied in the same way, just concentrating more on the parts of the metal we want the oldest, most crusty corrosion. One of the coolest features of dirty down rust is that by introducing water to it, either by diluting it prior to application or dabbing it on afterwards, we can alter the tone and value. The more water we introduce, the more the area we're manipulating will dry with a lighter, yellow, flaky look. Using a brush lightly dampened with water, I'll tap and stipple at a few select areas to bring about this variation in finish. And for any areas that dried too light for our tastes, we can easily and quickly tone them down using a very thin filter of Abtalung smoke. Dirty down rust isn't affected by spirits, so we don't run any chance of upsetting the work we've just done. Simply lightly glaze some of the smoke on to knock back any areas that seem too eye-catching and bright. We can finally start working on one of my favourite effects on this miniature now, bringing that nasty, horrific, flayed skin cape to life. To set the initial tone, I'll come in with some neat carrying crimson that's been given a couple of hours to cure on my palette. This will cause it to thicken up into a less liquid, more chunky consistency. I'll stipple this on fairly sparingly to all of the edges, cuts and around the holes and tears in the cape. After giving this 15 minutes to dry, I'll come in with our trusty Q-tip, lightly dampened with spirits, to feather at the transition areas where we applied the carrying crimson. The aim here is to create a smooth and subtle blend, filtering the bloody effect out onto the surrounding areas, leaving the edges with a slick, gory look. To reinforce the very edges and add a nasty, coagulated blood style effect, I'll mix some Ichor the Damned into the carrying crimson, producing a darker, muted version, which is then lightly dabbed on to the extreme edges of the cape. Moving over to the bottom of the folds in the cape and the recessed areas, I'll come in with the same carrion and Ichor mix and stipple this on gently, gradually building up the intensity. During this step and the following feathering passes, we can add a really nice, diverse and visually interesting mottled look to the skin, creating something truly nasty, disgusting and realistic. When it comes to feathering out the previous application, I'll take a slightly different approach. Initially, I'll just clean away the raised folds and soften the transitional areas next to them. Then I'll focus on lightly breaking up the gradients between the recesses and raised areas. reactivating and removing the wash using soft tapping motions in an irregular manner, creating a patchy, broken and uneven finish, pushing the look of stretched, blotchy and bloodshot flesh. To refine the effect even further, I'll come in with a brush dampened with just a touch of spirit, to continue working these transitional areas, breaking up any hard edges of the wash and creating that mottled, blotchy finish that we're aiming for. And to add more contrast and visual interest, I'll come back for a detailed cleaning pass, just on the highest points of the folds towards the upper area of the cape. We've now got a diverse range of finishes, from the dark, bloody crevices, blotchy, mottled transitional areas, to the clean, almost untouched high points. After waiting around half an hour for the previous steps to take hold a bit, I'll repeat the process once again, darkening the folds down with the carrion and ichor mix, before refining, feathering and pushing that patchy, mottled and irregular finish. I often work this way, adding an effect, reducing it, adding some more, and so on, until I'm happy with the end result. During the feathering and cleaning passes, we lost some of that fresh gore effect on the cut edges and around the tears, so I'll just come back in here to bring that back up with neat, partially cured carrion crimson. I also take this opportunity to pick up any of the particles contained in carrion crimson that aren't quite where I want them, either removing them altogether or depositing them back in the deeper folds. The final step for our flayed skin cloak is subtly blending the last step in to the adjacent areas. Using a clean, dry and soft brush, I'll just gently feather at these edges, slowly creating a super smooth, seamless blend. By using a dry brush rather than one dampened with spirits, we won't reactivate the enamel, meaning we can get far smoother transitions. Okay, let's move over to the leather areas on his backpack and pouch. Our first port of call is going to be reintroducing the base colour to the raised and open areas by glazing on 2 to 3 thin coats, gradually building up the colour. Following this, I'll add a touch of Ammo Atom Sky Green to the mix and repeat the glazing steps, just covering less area, focusing more on the points where light would gather. After adding some more sky green to the previous mix, I'll repeat the same steps once again, covering even less area this time. And it's here I'll start to introduce small lines along leading edges, prominent areas, and places that I want to take on the look of splits and cracks in the leather. And for the final highlight, I'll add a dot more of the sky green to the mix and continue laying down those fine lines to the extreme edges and areas of wear and tear. With some careful placement and controlled application, we can add a really nice, authentic texture and feel to this leather. In the way we approached the previous steps, we'll do the same for the black leather straps and belts. Using Vallejo Tire Black thin to a glaze consistency, I'll focus on adding those fine lines to the upper edges and areas I want that cracked, pitted look. We're nearly onto the home straight now, and can finish off the steel areas by coming in for one final highlight pass to bring up a few spots after the dirty down steps earlier. Using thin lead belcher, I'll apply very fine lines along any edges of the metals that might pick up scratches and damage. Focusing primarily on the cutting edges of his greatsword, this step will add contrast and some surface finish variation against the dark shadows and crusty corrosion. Let's move back over to the armour now, and the final steps in completing that grimdark, dingy and dirty green. You could quite easily just leave the armour as is after the unifying wash, and it would be perfectly serviceable. But here, I'm going to show you how to introduce some vibrancy, colour variations and surface finish variation by way of the oil scrubbing technique. First up, I'll apply some tiny dots of Winsor & Newton chrome green hue to one armour panel at a time. These dots will be placed in areas where light would gather if lit from above. I'll then come in with a soft, clean and dry brush and scrub and feather the dots of oil into the surrounding area. Oils blend effortlessly and incredibly smoothly, adding a very subtle shift in hue and light value with each layer applied. Here you'll see me applying a second pass of the chrome green hue. This will increase the value and saturation slightly. You can keep going with these applications to render a super vibrant end colour if you like, but in this case 2 layers was just right for my intentions for the armour. Slowly work your way around the miniature, then when you're done we can move on. And the final highlight on the armour will be Windsor & Newton Phthalo Yellow Green. Applied in the same way, just focusing the dots even more precisely towards the implied light source. This will blend flawlessly with the chrome green hue. This is a super vibrant and powerful colour, so one application was enough for me. The satin look achieved by oil scrubbing gives a ton of surface finish variation against the dull matte shadows and chips. To complete our leather workup, I'm going to apply a very thin glaze of Abteilung sepia oil. Because this is so heavily diluted, it will only have a very slight sheen in comparison to when oils are scrubbed on. But this will still complement the surrounding areas in a subtle yet effective manner. This thin glaze will unify the highlight steps and give everything a smooth finish. One last effect we can add to give the armour another layer of depth and interest is the introduction of a complementary colour. And what better to add to Death Guard armour than some grungy brown. In the same way we highlighted a couple of steps ago, small dots of Abteilung dark rust are applied to the lower, recessed portions of each plate, then scrubbed in, blending perfectly with the green hues, super smooth and simple to achieve. If for any reason you aren't happy with the placement or coverage of the dark rust colour, you can simply come back in with the Phthalo Yellow Green, add a couple of dots to the edge of the colour transition and blend them out, all the while keeping everything looking natural and smooth. Just to differentiate the black belts and straps from the surrounding materials, I came in with a very subtle glaze of thin satin varnish here, adding yet more surface finish variation and visual interest to the miniature. Our second to last effect today is going to be creating an ominous glow to the coils of the Lord's plasma pistol. My intention here was to achieve the look of the coils cooling down after being recently fired. I felt that this more subtle effect would better suit the overall atmosphere of the project, more so than a super bright and intense glow. I took some AK Interactive fluorescent orange enamel liquid pigment, thinned it quite heavily, then carefully applied it to the base of the coils, closest to the casing of the weapon. Capillary action will force this application into all of the crevices and recesses for us. Once this had dried, the overall look was just a tad too bright for my liking. So, to subdue it just a touch, I glazed on a super thin pass of sepia oil, muting the brightness just enough without diminishing the overall effect. Our last step today is to get those eye lenses looking grim and nasty. Over a black base, I gave the entire lens a coat of ammo red, added a touch of black and glazed the bottom 2/3, then a touch more black, glazing the bottom third for a nice easy fade. I then mixed up some Ichor the Damned with spirits just to help it flow, and feathered on a thin pass to the entirety of the lenses and the recesses around them, giving them a slight, slick, black, otherworldly sheen with the red glowing through underneath. And here we have the end result, the Lord of Poxes in all his horrific, grimdark and pestilent glory. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for your continued support and kind words of encouragement. The Grimdark Collective has the absolute best community and you guys make this a blast. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, please consider dropping a like and a follow. I have some exciting projects lined up and big plans for the channel moving forwards. So for now, I bid you a good week, keep it grim, and I'll see you next time.